Jesus loves me. This I know. Thank you. Someone gets it. You may be seated. We are still in our series of Storytime, as we are going through the stories or parables that Jesus told, one by one, as we're not covering all of them, but we are covering some of the most important ones, or some of the ones that may have been taught wrong over time, or something like that. So this morning, I'll be reading from the 10th chapter of Luke. This is a very familiar story. It's the parable of the Good Samaritan. And I'm going to ask a favor this morning, because those of you who have been in church for a very long time have probably heard untold about the teaching on the Good Samaritan. I mean, the Good Samaritan is a phrase within our English language. It's that powerful and that important. But this morning, I want you to clear a lot of that out of your mind. Forget any preconceived notions that you have. And I'll explain that here in a little bit. But try to hear these words as if it's the first time you've ever heard this story. And then Jesus answered and said, "A certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among thieves, who stripped him of his clothing, wounded him, and departed, leaving him half dead. Then, by chance, a certain priest came down that road. And when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. And likewise a Levite, when he arrived at the place, came and looked and passed by on the other side. But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. And he went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. He set him up on his own animal, brought him to the inn, and took care of him. And on the next day, when he departed, he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said to him, 'Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, when I come again, I will repay you.' So which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to him who fell among thieves?" And he said, "He who showed mercy on him." Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise." The word of God for the people of God. Praise be to God. Now this story, as it's been told over and over for years, is actually remarkably simple. But somehow or another, some of teachers have been able to assign all kinds of strange and bizarre interpretations to this story. For example, some of the early church people said that this was an allegory and there was an interpretation to it. So therefore, their idea is the man is Adam, Jerusalem is paradise, Jericho is the world, the robbers are hostile powers or demonic forces, the priest is the law, the Levite the prophets, the Samaritan is Christ, the wounds are disobedient, the animal is the Lord's body, and the inn is the church, and the Samaritan's return is the second coming. Yeah. And so that's an early church. This story has been used to justify everything from Marxism to socialism. One of the most interesting ones was, I'm not even going to get into who they are, but one group said that there's a problem with this story because this story actually talks about about, short-term taking care of people instead of doing it in the long term, then what we really need to do is sit down and study why did these bad men, what social things were going on that made them attack this poor guy. Then we have to delve into it and find out what the social things are. And while all of us are in favor, I believe, of social justice, done the right way, and kindness, and caring, and compassion, talk about straining a gnat and swallowing a camel. To understand this story, we need to bump back up to verse 25. We need to start there. Jesus is sitting and teaching. And it says, and behold, a certain lawyer stood up and tested him. Now, don't go off on lawyers. Okay? Because this kind of lawyer is not the kind of lawyer that we think of today. A lawyer is a Pharisee. A lawyer is a scribe. They were experts in the law of God. This was a Pharisee or a scribe, one of the two. Their job was to study and know the law of God inside and out. And he was amongst those that were standing around and listening to what Jesus was teaching. And he decides to test him. That's what it says. Read it. It says he decided to test him. Now this isn't the first time nor the last time, is it, that the Pharisees tried to find something on Jesus that they could use to disable him. Excuse me. Remember the coin deal? Should we pay taxes to Caesar or not? And Jesus, as he always did, said, show me the coin. Whose image is on it? Give to Caesar what belongs to him. Give to God what belongs to him. They were always trying to set up traps. And there's a whole marriage and divorce trap that they set. There's a lot of traps they set. This is one of these. Now this story is only found in Luke. Unlike so many of the others, which are in all three of the synoptic gospels, this one is only found in Luke. So as we back up and we see, this is the teacher. He stood up and he tested him, it says. Teacher, Rabbi, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? Does that sound familiar? Didn't we hear someone else ask that question in a different book? The rich young man who came to him said, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? Did they ask the same thing of John the Baptist that gathered around? What shall we do? What is it that we must do? It's always about do, isn't it? Especially with legalistic people. Do to be, do, doobie, 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 doobie. Okay? What shall I do to inherit eternal life? Now this man was a scribe or a Pharisee. Jesus knew that. And so he responds to him, okay, what's the law say? You're a lawyer. What does the law say? Tell me. Same thing he said to the rich young man, is it not? What does the law say? Master, what must I do to receive eternal life? Well, what does the law tell you to do? And so he answered and said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. Now this is interesting that the Pharisee or scribe says this because we heard Jesus say the same thing in different places, did we not? This is the sum of the law and the prophets. They knew this. Same way he answered the rich young ruler when he said, what shall I do to be saved? And he said, well, what does the law say? And so this lawyer quotes from Deuteronomy and from Leviticus. Two different books, two different scriptures that sum up the law and the prophets. Jesus said, well, there you go. Go, do it. Now, to the rich young ruler said, well, all of these I've kept since my youth. But this guy's different. This guy's way different. He looks at him and he says, if you look at verse 29 with me, but he, wanting to justify himself. If you take notes in your Bible, underline that. But he, wanting to justify himself, he wanted to justify, he wanted everyone to see what a righteous man he was. Like the rich young ruler who said, hey, I've kept all these since my youth. This guy says he wanted to justify himself. He came to test Jesus. When Jesus answered his question with a question, and then he has to justify himself. Rich young ruler said, all of these I've kept since my youth. This guy wants clarification. Who's my neighbor? You notice not once does he ask, how do I do this? How do I love God with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength? See, he refers back to the law. Now, understand, if you read the law, let's just go with the Ten Commandments. The first half of the Ten Commandments are about loving God. The second half are about loving people. Wanting to justify himself. See how righteous I am. I know the law. So surely, Jesus, you must have some way of defining who my neighbor is, because you know what? I talk to all my church members and they say I'm doing great. Those are my neighbors, right? Certainly not the people that are out beside that, just the people, you know, my other Pharisees, all the members of my church. Those are my neighbors. And they say I'm doing great. So unless you have some weird definition of neighbors that I don't get. See, they've been taught. Jesus said this. Have they not been taught? Love your neighbors and hate your enemies. So obviously my enemy's not my neighbor. Who then is my neighbor? My church folk. They're neighbors. My own sect of Pharisees, we're all closely knit. We're neighbors. And we'll tolerate the other sects of Pharisees. I mean, they're all kind of messed up in the head, but we'll tolerate that. But not those people. See how good I am? See how righteous I am? I'm in church every Sunday. Y'all see it, right? My car is at church every time the door is open. I'm a righteous person. I have at least 3 Bibles in my house and one on my coffee table. I blow the dust off of it once every 2 or 3 months, whether it needs it or not. But I have it. Don't have a clue what's in it. But I have it. See how righteous I am? He wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, okay, who is my neighbor? Then Jesus begins to tell the story. And it's so beautiful in its simplicity. How we can twist and get around and turn it into something it's not, I don't know. But people can really mess things up. It's one of the reasons I've told you over and over and over again. Don't believe it just because I say it. What I teach is to inspire you to go and learn. And if you come across something that I have taught that you take issue with and you can prove me wrong, come to me. I will humbly apologize. I'm not perfect. And that goes for any religious teacher you're listening to. If you're staying at home and you're watching these religious teachers on television, we are told to try the spirits. Don't believe everything you're told. Ever. Check it. By faith. Allow the Holy Spirit to explain it to you. People are fallible. God is not. Okay, so he says, he begins to tell this story. And it starts off with a man is going from Jerusalem to Jericho. And here's some things you need to know about that. That's important. And I'd be willing to bet that most of us just kind of like, yeah, okay, Jerusalem, Jericho, whatever. But this is important because this particular road still exists today. There's only one way to go from Jerusalem to Jericho, and that's on this road. And this particular road, well, first you must understand this. Jerusalem sits at approximately 3,000 feet above sea level. Jericho sits at approximately 1,000 feet below sea level. This is a 17-mile road. Now, if you can imagine this road in your mind now, if you do the math, you're dropping approximately 4,000 feet in a 17-mile road. Do you understand how steep that is? This road is it's kind of windy. They run buses up and down it now. It just scares people to death because at certain parts of the road, the bus will actually stick out over the curb. It's a scary, scary place. The other thing about this particular road is it's full of caves and crevices that are ideal for robbers to hide in. Meaning that the certain man would be a Jew. And the Jews and the Samaritans hated each other. This was prejudice at its finest, folks. The Jews hated the Samaritans. The Samaritans were considered half-breeds. They were the product of intermarriage between Jews and Gentiles. That's why when Jesus went to the woman at the well, there was this discussion on where the Jews worship and where we worship, because they were outcast. They were hated by the Jews. I'm telling you, this was prejudice at its... They hated the Samaritans worse than they hated the Gentiles. Because they were half-breeds. They worship the same God, but their worship doesn't count because they're not like us. I want you to keep that in mind as we continue with the story. Because this was racism at its ultimate between the Jews and the Samaritans. Like I said, when Jesus told the story, he knew how to tell the story.